Thursday, November 15th, 2012. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Pope Runyon. And tonight we discuss the legendary Balkis, Queen of Sheba, and her place in the equally legendary tales of King Solomon. We will uncover the amazing historical facts behind her almost forgotten ancient empire, to which Arabia owed whatever traces of civilization it had remaining when Muhammad, peace be unto him, unified the Arabs under Islam. We will reveal a strange Turkish alternative version of the Masonic temple legend involving the casting of the Brazen Sea, in which Sheba becomes one of the three Grand Masters. And in this rendition of the story, Sheba and the architect are children of the jinn, whereas Solomon is only human. We will mention the Queen of Sheba in the medieval alchemical tradition and her connection with the fifth degree of Kratarapoa. So, as we said, tune in and we will learn what Solomon, Balkis, and Hiram were doing behind the veil. Now, some of you may have seen, and you can see it on the reruns, of course, the film Solomon and Sheba, which came out, was 1959, actually, with Bill Brenner as Solomon and Gina Lollobrigida as the Queen of Sheba. Now, this in this film, of course, in order to serve the biblical audience, the Queen of Sheba, rather unhistorically or unlegendarily, gives up her pagan ways and is converted to the worship of Jehovah, which of course didn't happen in the Bible even. But in this very, very otherwise delightful film, Gina Lollobrigida does a pagan dance, kind of a ancient pagan ceremonial belly dance, which is worth the entire price of the film. This is one of the most beautifully erotic things that's ever been filmed. And it's not salacious or anything like that, but it's just beautifully erotic, and she's, of course, Gina Lollobrigida is a very beautiful, talented woman. Now, and it's supposed to represent a pagan ceremony. No. Last time I saw this was on a Christian TV channel, and they cut out her dance. And oh gosh, I mean that was really kind of sad. But I'm sure it's still in the DVD version. Anyway, the Queen of Sheba, as you may recall from Sunday school and whatever, the Queen of Sheba was a mysterious, ancient lady monarch who visited King Solomon way back in between 800 and 900 BC. Solomon, as you recall, was the son of David, the king who built the great temple, the first great temple in Jerusalem, and he had established a Hebrew empire, and at least according to the Bible. And so the Queen of Sheba arrived, and the Bible doesn't quite say where she came from, but she arrived with a huge caravan of camels and bearing goods and spices and gold and rich gifts. And she came to test the wisdom of Solomon, supposedly. And she and Solomon had a kind of a riddle contest. And Solomon answered all of her questions and all of her riddles, and that's the biblical version of it. And she was very impressed and returned to her native land, left all of the gifts, of course, and returned to her native land. Now, that's the biblical version. The Quranic version, because the Sheba and Solomon both play an even more prominent part in the Quranic version of it. In that version of it, Solomon is concerned because he has heard the rumor that she has certain supernatural powers and that she's related to the jinn. And for those of you who don't remember or don't know, the jinn are a peculiar race of astral entities. We would best describe them in Western terms as fire elementals, actually. That's probably the best way to describe them. And they were pre-Adamic. In other words, they existed before Adam. And this is Islamic tradition. And the Queen of Sheba, according to Arab legends, was the daughter of one of these princes of the jinn by a mortal woman. This, of course, sort of makes you think that maybe, well, whatever. But so Solomon, having heard this, he was kind of concerned that maybe she had hairy legs like Lilith. Oh boy! And so what he did is he played a trick on her. He polished up the floor to where it was like a mirror, and she thought she was walking on water, and she lifted her skirts up so Solomon could peek at her legs, and he realized that, oh, well, she's not too hairy. and so that's one of the stories. There are in the Arabian side of this legend, there are numerous stories about Sheba, her magic hoofle bird that she sends. Solomon, of course, can understand the language of the birds, but so what's the truth behind all of this, and what relation does it have to the Hermetic tradition? That's how does it relate to the magical tradition? Well, okay. In the first place, Solomon, as we all know, is one of our Western Hermetic avatars. Well, we have Melchizedek and we have Solomon, and if you're into the Wiccan end of things, we have Merlin, of course. But essentially, in the Hermetic Kabbalistic Western magical tradition, Solomon is one of our avatars, and Solomon was famed for his wisdom. And there are Talmudic legends and Arabian legends that Solomon used his power over the demons, and some would say the jinn, of course, to build the temple. That's according to some Talmudic legends and some Arabian legends. And Solomon was famed for his wisdom. He was famed as a magician. And also, as we know, in the Bible, Solomon, when he got older, he turned from Jehovah and took up with Astarte, and he built a temple to Astarte. Well, of course, the Queen of Sheba is a living embodiment of that Canaanite tradition. It's just, although the gods of Sheba's realm, which we now know was down in Yemen, southern Arabia, there was a kingdom called Saba, hence Sheba, the queen of Saba, the queen of Sheba, and their pantheon, their pagan pantheon, remember now, this is back 800 BC, their pagan pantheon was very similar to the Canaanite pantheon of Hiram of Tyre, who helped Solomon build the temple. Now, you remember, so Solomon, in the Masonic legend, and of course, Masonry figures considerably in modern Hermetic tradition, Masonry is very influential. And in fact, we could say that Masonry is originally Hermetic. Actually, it was kind of based on Hermetic principles, and so there's a lot of, especially in modern times, during the Age of Enlightenment, Masonry has had quite an influence on Western magic and Western occultism. So here we have this legend, this Masonic legend of the building of Solomon's temple. And in the building of Solomon's temple, of course, Hiram of Tyre, the Canaanite, the king of Phoenicia, he's a pagan. He worships El, Father El, and Baal and Astarte and the rest of them. And he is one of the Grand Masters with Solomon, the Hebrew, and Hiram Abiff, the architect, whose mother is Jewish and whose father is Phoenician. And these three Grand Masters get together and they build the temple using both Hebrew and Phoenician workers to do it. Now, what this essentially says is, allegorically, that, hey, Hebrews and Phoenicians can get along, or they ought to be able to. Of course, three Phoenicians ganging up on poor old Hiram and try to get the secret word out of him, and they're going to give it to him, so they kill him. But that's another aspect of the story. Now, where does Sheba fit into this? Well, for one thing, her religion is very similar to the religion of Hiram of Tyre and the religion of the Phoenicians. And Solomon later embraces that religion himself. So there's that aspect to it. But there's another aspect to it also that we ought to get into at this point. And that is that there is a different version of the Masonic legend that was apparently, I suspect it originated in Syria, but it ended up becoming a popular cafe tale that was told by storytellers in coffee houses in Istanbul back around 1840, where a French decadent, French writer and traveler by the name of Gerard de Nerval collected this story over several nights in a Turkish coffee house. And in this version of the Masonic legend, the Queen of Sheba arrives and is fascinated by Hiram the architect. And Hiram the architect, who is, of course, one of the Grand Masters, of course, and then there's Hiram. But Hiram of Tyre didn't even figure in this story at all, this version of it. It's Hiram the architect, it's the Queen of Sheba, and it's Solomon. This is the triumvirate here in this story. And what happens is that, according to this version of it, is that Sheba thinks Solomon is not very bright, actually, and her civilization is much more efficient and advanced than Solomon's, and so she isn't getting along too well. Well, she's patronizing Solomon, but she is fascinated by Hiram the architect because she detects that and finds out that he himself, like her, is sired by the jinn. Right? Okay, so the two of them are going to find they realize that they're soulmates. Yeah, and Solomon is he's just a human being, and he's not a very smart human being anyway, and he gets jealous. So now, if you recall, Masonic legend has it that the three ruffians who are Phoenician workmen, they get together and try to get the word out of old Hiram in the temple, and he won't give it to them, so they kill him. Well, anyway, in this version of the story, Hiram is casting the Brazen Sea. Now, the Brazen Sea, if you recall your knowledge of Solomon's temple, there were a number of rather prominent artifacts like the two pillars, Yaqin and Boaz, out in front. And then there's, naturally, there's the Holy of Holies and the Ark and all of that. Table of shewbread. And the seven-branch candlestick, we're all familiar with that one. But then out in the courtyard, there is this huge brass or brazen sea. This gigantic bowl. And it's on the backs of 12 oxen to represent the different signs of the zodiac, and this is out there for filled with lustral water and whatever. And Hiram, being the architect and the craftsman and all, one of his jobs is to cast this monstrous bowl. And nobody's ever done anything like this before. This bowl is, well, I'm just a rough estimate. This bowl is, over 20 feet across. I mean, it's a great big thing, and it's got to be, it's bronze, molten bronze. So he's going to cast it, and they gather quite a crowd together. This is a national event. And Solomon and Sheba are going to oversee this, and Hiram supervises it, and they're going to cast this in molten bronze. Okay. Well, according to this version of the story, Solomon is already jealous of Hiram, and so the ruffians, they know about this, and so they approach Solomon, and Solomon gives them Martian permission. You know what Martian permission is. This is when you suggest that you might like something done, but you don't actually tell them to do it. and so these three workmen plug up some of the holes in some of the spouts that are going to be used in the casting, so the casting will be uneven. And so this great, big, huge ladle of molten bronze is poured into the mold, and everybody is looking with bated breath to see whether or not this casting will work. And Hiram looks down into this conflagration, and he realizes that these three spouts are plugged up. And at that point, his patron spirit, one of the great princes of the jinn, a man, or a jinn, of course, known as Tubal-Cain. Now, that sounds familiar, too, doesn't it? Tubal-Cain, the first craftsman in metals, appears to Hiram in a vision and says, Hiram, you are a creature of the jinn. dive into that molten bronze and unplug those spouts, and that casting will be perfect. And Hiram says, all right. And he does a swan dive into the molten bronze and swims down into the molten bronze and unplugs the spouts, and sure enough, the casting is accomplished. Of course, Hiram is in his physical form is completely dissolved instantly, so Hiram reappears down in the underworld, way down in the underworld where all the jinn, of course, in our case, this would be the gnomes, naturally, but he's down there in the underworld, and Tubal-Cain congratulates him on his heroic, demise. And all says, now I'm going to give you all the secrets of the minerals and all the secrets of the eternal alchemy of the earth and everything. Give you all of the secret knowledge. So he does. And then Hiram reassumes his human form, and he and the Queen of Sheba run off and leave Solomon wondering just what has happened. Oh boy, that's the Turkish coffee house version of the Masonic legend, which actually makes the Queen of Sheba one of the Grand Masters. Now, this particular version, as I say, I think it comes from Syria, and I have a suspicion that it might originate with that same sect in Syria where our old friend P.B. Randolph first discovered what has later been referred to as the ninth degree. And I kind of suspect that's where it originated. But the important point about all of this is that this is an alchemical allegory. And this particular version of it seems to have influenced, very secretly, European alchemists, because the Queen of Sheba is a kind of a secret avatar or avatrix of European alchemists. Yeah, she's their patron lady. Well, that of course leads us to mention that fifth degree of Crater-Poa tradition is called alchemia, and in our version of the Crater-Poa, this particular version of the temple legend does figure, at least for its allegorical point of view. And we're not the only ones who did that. Rudolf Steiner liked that version of the temple legend too. And in fact, it was so popular for a while that they even made a play out of it in Europe. Now, needless to say, of course, Orthodox Masonry doesn't care too much for it. But the thing that I want to point out here in relation to that is that the Queen of Sheba, Hiram of Tyre, Hiram of Biff, Solomon, all of these biblical, Quranic, and legendary figures are all connected in what has come to be known as the Hermetic tradition. They're all connected to it. And one of the reasons why this is the case is, you remember now, we're talking about Saba down there in Yemen, now South Arabia, all right? These people were called Sabaeans. They called themselves Sabaeans, all right? And they became known later as the South Sabaeans. And the reason for that is that up north, right on the what's now the Turkish border, right between the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates, we have that ancient city of Haran, the city of the moon god, and where the North Sabaeans were, and they call themselves the North Sabaeans basically because they were worshiping the planets and the stars and the pagan entities attached to them pretty much on the same manner as the South Sabaeans. So, when they were asked, or not asked, they were told by this Islamic emir in about the 8th century A.D. that they would have to be Christians, Jews, Muslims, or Sabaeans. Otherwise, they were going to be taken as slaves or whatever. So they chose to be Sabaeans. So they became the North Sabaeans, and they had a tremendous influence on the Hermetic tradition. Their influence on the Hermetic tradition was really, really very extensive. But they were, as I say, they adopted the title Sabaeans, but because the Queen of Sheba, those Sabaeans were essentially worshiping and the same pantheon. Now, you got to understand though that about this ancient empire of the Queen of Sheba. One of the things that why do we know so little about it? And it was gone 200 years before Muhammad. 200 years before Muhammad cleansed the Kaaba and converted the Arabs to his particular version of Judeo-Christianity. I don't mean to insult any of our Muslim leaders or listeners by saying that, unless you're Sufis, and if you're Sufis, you won't be insulted. But Muhammad, I think that Islam is it's definitely biblical, and it definitely has influence by Christianity. But by the time Muhammad evangelized the Arabs, by that time Saba was gone. It had been devastated. And the Sabaeans were still there, and they were highly respected, which is why Muhammad said in the Quran, he said not once but 3 times, he said that Sabaeans were exempt from forced conversion to Islam. They were like people of the book. Why were they like people of the book? Because they could read. They were very literate, and most of the Arabs were not. And in fact, when Muhammad could evangelize them, they were pretty barbaric actually, and the Sabaeans were their intellectuals, the surviving Sabaeans. Now, why were the Sabaeans gone? Well, one of the great wonders of the ancient world. I mean, on a par with the Great Pyramid. I mean, this thing was a magnificent achievement in engineering that we have completely forgotten about. And it made the southern part of Arabia, what they called Arabia Fili, it made it into a lush garden. And it was this giant dam, this huge dam that had been built. Nobody knows how many thousands of years ago this thing had been built. And it irrigated that whole area. It wasn't just Saba. There were 3 other kingdoms there too, and this empire extended all the way into Ethiopia. This is why the Ethiopians claim the Queen of Sheba as theirs. Actually, she could have been. I suppose she could have been Ethiopian, but she was located, of course, in Saba, which is in Yemen. But that whole area was irrigated. It was irrigated. It was like our San Fernando Valley, like our Central California Valley. It was all irrigated, and they had beautiful gardens and farms, and they were the bread basket and the spice basket of all of that part of the world, and they had a beautiful civilization. They're the ones that built these adobe skyscrapers. I mean that originally that was Sabaean. I mean these were the civilized people of Arabia. And when that dam broke, finally, and it silted up, they couldn't say that. It just so much silt built up over the years that it just couldn't. It was beyond their capability to say that. And when it finally cut loose about 200 years before Muhammad, it just devastated the country. And so Sheba, the land of Sheba, the land of Saba, became a kind of a memory, a legend, and yet what an influence it had, and as I said, that empire extended all the way down into Ethiopia. It probably had some connection with the last Egyptianized Nubians, because Nubia and Meroe were civilizations in their own right, of course, and they were very similar to Egyptian. So this whole area down there, nobody knows about it anymore. Nobody. Why? Well, for one thing, Islam doesn't really want to look into its pagan past that much. See, that's one reason. They don't really want to dig into. Well, they do. Some of them do now, but I mean, for a long time, they really wanted to suppress all this, and so a lot of it has been lost. But as I said, this civilization was magnificent, and Sheba truly was probably, probably smarter than Solomon. I really think. I'm not going to say that I'm trying to push the Turkish version, but actually, I think we know that Saba was a magnificent civilization. We're not very, but Solomon may very well have been exaggerated, but the Hebrews in captivity over there in Babylon, writing about the glories of Solomon. I think they may have exaggerated the glories of Solomon, but there was no exaggerating the glories of the Queen of Sheba. In any case, this is all part of and incorporated into these legends into the Hermetic tradition, because because of the legends of Solomon and his magic and his building of the temple, and with the help of the Phoenicians, and all of this figures so much into our Masonic aspect, which also figures into the Hermetic tradition, and then, of course, the connection between the South Sabaeans and the North Sabaeans, and all of their influence on the Hermetic tradition. Well, you may ask, what is that influence? What was it that they gave us? Well, what they gave us really was in two words. They gave us elective astrology. That's what they gave us, and elective astrology, of course, is the practical big gun of Hermetic magic. This is what the Picatrix is all about, And the Picatrix, the soul of the Picatrix is the North Sabaean planetary invocations and the planetary system of planetary deities and the Sabaean planetary magic system, in other words, elective astrology. So this is one of their great contributions, and as you probably remember, Ibn Qara was the great Sabaean wizard, and these Sabaeans, the North Sabaeans now, remember the South Sabaeans were only a memory at this point. The North Sabaeans were the wizards of the Arabian Nights. They were exempt because of the South Sabaeans. They were exempt from forced conversion to Islam, and therefore these North Sabaeans could teach astrology. They could teach magic. They could practice magic. And they did in the universities of Spain and in Baghdad. These were the wizards of the Arabian Nights, the Sabaeans. And they certainly had a tremendous influence on the Hermetic tradition, because this is where our Western magicians got their alchemy and their astrological magic from. You say their alchemy, a Turba Philosophorum. We wouldn't have that. That's 9th century, and that's the great alchemical manuscript, the Turba Philosophorum, and that came through the Arabs. Of course, it recounts a lot of Greek material, but it's still transmitted by the Arabs, and the Picatrix, of course, is transmitted through the Arabs. And yet, these are actually not so much Arab works as they are as they depend upon the Sabaeans. And the whole thing, as I say, goes back to the original religion of Babylon, Saba, Haran, and then thence to Alexandria. And this is the religion of the heavens and the earth. This is the idea that as above, so below. That man is a miniature of the universe itself, and he aligns himself with the universe, and he has all of the planets also within himself, and that he, if he chooses to align himself with the universe and influence the universe, as the universe influences him, he can influence the universe if he has the knowledge and the wisdom. It is this tradition that the South Sabaeans of the Queen of Sheba's time, the North Sabaeans of the Haranians in the Middle Ages, and this all harks back to and is epitomized in the legend of King Solomon and Hiram of Tyre and the Phoenicians, the architect, in both the regular Masonic legend and this very interesting Turkish version of it that we have. And also, too, I'd like to point out that this carries over all the way over into Ethiopia, because all of these traditions I've just mentioned have been taken over and maintained and transmitted in those monasteries over in Ethiopia. Yeah, Ethiopia, in a way, is like the Tibet of the Western world. They've got manuscripts over there that we haven't even discovered yet, that are buried away in those monasteries, carved into the walls of those deep gorges, and both Coptic Christians and Old Temple Jews too. Some of they claim they have the Ark of the Covenant over there. Maybe they do. And they certainly were connected to the Queen of Sheba, and whether, as I say, they believe that the Queen of Sheba actually came from Ethiopia. But whether that's true or not, I think probably she did come from Yemen. But there's a very, very strong connection. And one of the things, too, that we need to recall is, and this is a very interesting little connection here, too, that back in 1700s, I think it was about 1740, something like that, a earlier day Indiana Jones type guy, a fellow by the name of Bruce, a Scotchman, was tramping through Ethiopia and trying to discover as much about the culture as he could. And as I say, kind of an earlier Indiana Jones. And he managed to get out of Ethiopia with two copies of the Book of Enoch in Coptic, of course. And these books were so sacred and so secret that the Ethiopian priests chased him all the way across the Mediterranean and Europe, trying to recapture the books and kill him if they could. And this is a real adventure story, but because these books have been lost. These books have been lost for almost 500 years or more. And like I say, Dee and Kelly didn't have them when they did their Enochian. They didn't have the Book of Enoch. It was lost. But it had survived in the Coptic all the way from about 400 BC. It had survived in the monasteries, the hidden monasteries of Ethiopia. And this is directly related to that Sabaean, Yemen Sabaean culture. And so the Book of Enoch, fascinating aspect of this too, is that when the Iranians up there, the North Sabaeans, who became the North Sabaeans, back around about 800 AD, when they were told they had to either become Muslims, Christians, Jews, or Sabaeans, they were very cagey, and they decided, I think maybe we better get some books to back this up. Well, there weren't any. There's just nothing survived of the old South Sabaean religion. Nothing. We have no record of their temple, their rituals, or anything like that. We have a lot of records of their laundry lists and their historical proclamations, that sort of stuff. But we don't. And I think probably the reason for that is not too far to seek. Those rituals have been destroyed. But so the Iranians, they took counsel, and they said, well, when these Muslims come back and they're going to ask us what we are, and we're going to tell them we're Sabaeans, what if they ask us for a book? And we said, well, there are no South Sabaean books. They got rid of all of them. So what are we going to do? Well, let's pick some books. We have some sacred books here. So several of them, of course, had been to Alexandria and back, like most everybody else did. So, well, let's we're kind of hermetic. Let's take the commander of Hermes Trismegistus, and that can be our holy book because we're on that line anyway. And okay, and we'll do that. But no, wait a minute. No, these people are kind of biblical. One of the old Indian elders said, they're pretty biblical. Maybe you better get some book out of the Bible. and the other, and one of them says, how about this? I've got a copy of the Book of Enoch. And so the North Sabaeans, around about 800 A.D., adopted the Hermetic corpus and the Book of Enoch as their holy books. Yeah, and of course, it wasn't too much after that. Then they had, within the next few hundred years, they were hobnobbing with Italian Hermetic scholars, and some of them even went over, some of the Italians even went over to Haran. So this spread all over the place. But we got to remember, we got to keep remembering the traditional legendary connections at a base here. And this is why I'm having a lot of fun going over this tonight, because we just ran Prince of Cotton, the Magic Bow, to get you, familiar with Canaanite mythology and how important Canaanite mythology, and which is basically what we're dealing with here, how important this is to the magical tradition. And, well, sure, we still have the angels, and certainly, and they're messengers of God, but the pagan god forms and the planets represent the forces of nature. In Yazura, in the astral plane, the forces of nature, both within us and nature itself. So this is all part of the what has become the Hermetic tradition. And, as I said, this is the power, and this is the juice that makes magical elective astrology work. And so let's keep these traditions very much in mind, and let's remember. And if you get a hold of that original Gina Lola Bridget movie, there. That dance scene is really worth it, I'll tell you. And so next week we'll be back to our regular instructive program, and we're going to be back to a regular instructive program, and then the following week, I hope, the following week we'll have Bill Masteel on. He has a new book out on the elementals. And we'll review that. I'll have a chance to get through that by then, and we'll have Bill back on and talk about. He's got this beautiful book on the elementals. He's very much on the line of Barden, but he makes Barden come alive. And so we're kind of looking forward to that. And meanwhile, take care and be well, and we'll see you next week. And good magic.